Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I am filming my March wrap-up video. You'll note that I have 0 books with me, and that's because I'm house sitting right now and I just completely forgot to bring the books that I read. But this was also the first month that I took advantage of my local library and read some books that I actually don't own. So yeah, I have my story graph pulled up here, and I'm going to be using that to remember everything that I read and talk you through everything, but I'll probably put up like an image of, you know, the book that I am talking about on the screen for you so you have some sort of reference point. There's like a lot more background noise here, so I apologize if you could hear like car sounds and like truck beeping and stuff like that. But hopefully it won't be too distracting. And it's already like well into April, it's like April 9th. So I am going to, I guess, jump right in and get on with the books. So the first book I finished this month was The General and His Labyrinth by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. What to say about this? I feel like I was impressed more by it as like a literary project than like it was less written for me, I guess, like as a reader. I appreciate it for its literary merit, but as a reader, it wasn't like the most enjoyable experience. One thing I will say, I think it has like one of the best endings of any book I've read, so I was definitely like more biased toward the end that I liked it more. I also spoke about this in a vlog a few weeks back, but I initially found it really hard to get into and really hard to like stick with the narrative because there are a lot of characters that have similar names, like multiple names. There are a lot of different like generals, and I think my my brain has just been like somehow programmed by like high school history classes that like when I hear about like military history, like something in my brain is just like snooze button, I don't care about this, and like kind of tunes it out. So I feel like it took a lot of effort for me to like stick with it and like stay involved in the story. I also will say like it's pretty sad. It is about this general's final, Simón Bolívar. It's a fictionalized account of his final kind of journey that he goes on like right before he dies, after he's been deposed as president. So it's not like an upbeat read, I wouldn't say. And yeah, I think one of the parts that I appreciated most was the acknowledgements, actually, which go on for, I want to say maybe like 4 pages. And Marquez talking about like the project of this book, which actually initially was kind of borrowed from another author, and just the whole process that he went through in terms of research and all of the different like translators and people who sent him documents. And it was just, I was really happy to see him acknowledge all these other kind of voices that we wouldn't get to hear about if it weren't for him. So I was really interested in that part of it, and I think I'm glad I read it. I'm interested in reading more Marquez, specifically Love in the Time of Cholera. I've heard really great things about, but I think this one was less like my speed, but I'm still glad that I read it. The next book I read was actually like a little bit of a, I don't know, like a different sort of book, I guess, to discuss on this channel. It's called Just Eat It, How Intuitive Eating Can Help You Get Your Shit Together Around Food, and it's by Laura Thomas, PhD. This was another book that I was like currently reading in a vlog that I uploaded a couple weeks back. And yeah, I think I enjoyed this book. I found it, I guess, like personally helpful for just like issues that I've had. I've had issues with disordered eating in the past. I'm like in a much better place with it now than I have ever been, I would say, which is like, yay, I'm happy about that. But I think it also acts as like a nice primer if you don't know about intuitive eating or body positivity or any of those kind of like buzzwordy phrases, and you're interested in kind of like anti-diet culture. Like a lot of books, Thomas references, you know, these foundational texts like The Beauty Myth by Naomi Wolf, which I have yet to read. I've read a lot of things that reference it. I appreciated also the balance of kind of, there's a lot of reflective work, like there are a lot of prompts and kind of like journaling ideas, if that's something you're into. I took advantage of some of them, but some of them I kind of like dog-eared and like might come back to them eventually. I feel like this is also one of those books that like maybe you read it cover to cover the first time around, or you kind of dip in and out of it, and it's something that can kind of live on your bookshelf and be there like if you need it in a specific time, as opposed to being something that you like read through once and then kind of like put away and never think about again. So yeah, I appreciated it. The one thing is that I find the tone of her writing is like, I think it's meant to be approachable. Like I feel like it's pretty kind of laid back and casual and very like, you go girl, like you got this babe, which like for some people they would appreciate that, and like I appreciated the encouraging aspects of that and like the positive tone, I guess. But I think the tone as a whole like can be a little bit annoying. I kind of tuned it out after a while and focused more on kind of the information and the tools that she talked about, because I think those were the parts of the book that I found most helpful. I also think that there's a big issue when it comes to books like this in general, like for example Body Positive Power by Megan Jane Crabbe, or other books that are kind of self-help anti-diet culture books. A lot of them are aimed at like a cis female audience, and while eating disorders are, you know, very common for cis women because of a lot of societal factors, I think it can feel somewhat exclusionary sometimes, like specifically through the lens of like being a queer person who's struggled with these things. I feel like it can sometimes be annoying to want to read about an issue that you've experienced and not like see yourself reflected in it as much, or like having to have your like girl hat on when you're talking about these issues, as opposed to just being like, people can deal with this as a whole. Like it doesn't always have to be about women, even though of course it is important to discuss like the societal and gendered aspects of it. I just wish that in some cases there was more of an emphasis on like speaking to everyone, not just speaking directly to women. So yeah, that was my that was my note about that one. But as a whole, I found it helpful, and I think even if you're someone who hasn't read a lot about intuitive eating or like the issues that she talks about in the book when it comes to disordered eating and hunger and fullness cues and all those kinds of things, I think it would be a good place to start, like if you're just looking into that kind of thing. But I also think that if you've read things before that deal with it, it won't be redundant necessarily. And I'm not like super well read or well versed in these issues. I've just like read a few other things here and there. So yeah, I found it helpful, and I think others might too. So the next book I read was a reread for me. It was The Shining Girls by Lauren Beukes. I believe that's how you pronounce her last name, but you can fact check me if you want, I'm not quite sure. This one was a thriller. I think it's been like several years since I read it for the first time. It was published in 2013. I might have gotten it in that year or maybe the year after. Yeah, either way, it's been a long time since I read it, and I think that definitely affected like my opinions on it the first time around, because I was much younger and I hadn't read as much. The first time I read it, I remember like absolutely loving it and thinking it was like so cool. I think it was like one of the first thrillers that I read as a whole, like just in that genre, and I think maybe that affected it, because I was like, oh, there's this whole different kind of book, and it can like really freak you out, and I thought that was cool. And I was really interested in kind of the premise of the book. So without giving too much away, it's a thriller and it focuses on this serial killer, Harper, but there's also an element of time travel. So he kind of has these objects that match women, and he kind of goes back and forth in time, killing people and dispersing the objects like differently throughout historical periods, if that makes sense. I didn't do a great job of explaining that. I thought it was really interesting and unique as these things go. I think often in terms of like thrillers as a category, like it can get very old. It's just like, this guy likes to kill people. He likes to kill women for this reason, and he's crazy, and we're gonna catch him. And it's kind of like, I need something more. Like I want something a little bit more interesting going on. I think it's easy to write kind of a formulaic thriller that isn't specifically like unique in any way. It's just like, oh, the killer has X quirk, but that doesn't necessarily make the story interesting. So yeah, I reread it. I gave it 2.75 stars. The things that I had problems with in this one I really enjoyed the female characters in the novel. There's like a main protagonist who is the one who kind of gets away from him, like he's supposed to kill her and he doesn't, and she's kind of like the last name on his list. And she is an intern at a Chicago newspaper, and she is almost killed by him but survives, and then she wants to track him down and catch him, basically. The one issue, not the one issue, there are a lot of issues, but I think the writing in general had some issues for me. Just like, I don't know, like there were some weird like linguistic quirks that I hadn't noticed the first time around that I was like, this is kind of like weird language to be using. And then apart from that, there's a relationship she has with the guy who's supposed to be her kind of mentor at this newspaper. And I believe his name is Dan. And he waffles wildly between feeling like he's kind of a father figure, but then also being like his internal monologue is like, don't look at her boobs. Like, it's very like I would say thinly veiled, but it's not really veiled. It's so male gazy in that way. And the novel is written by a woman. So I felt like in some ways she kind of couldn't decide whether she wanted to have them have this kind of like friendship or like mentor-mentee, kind of like older brother protective male instinct, like that kind of relationship, or whether she wanted them to be like lovers, even though he's like much older than her and it's like kind of creepy. But either way, I felt like she was kind of trying to ride the line between them, and that just made it like confusing and weird. And then the other thing was that the end of the novel, like there's nothing is resolved. Like it reads like there's going to be a sequel and then there isn't a sequel. So that was weird too. Spoiler alert. If you don't want to know what happens, skip ahead like 30 seconds. But they've just come out of the house and they're both like injured because they've been in this big fight with the killer, and then they catch him and like everything is fine and they're both gonna be okay, and they're kind of like holding each other. And then there's like a little bit of a postscript that catches up with like certain threads of the time travel narrative, which I really like the postscript. But you would expect it to then like go back to them and have like some kind of resolution of their relationship. But it's weird because she's kind of brushing off his like sexual advances until like she's literally like bleeding and he's injured, and they're kind of like helping each other out of this really terrifying situation. And then he has some line about how like, oh, like, do I have a chance now? And she's like, yeah, like you can, we'll see, basically. Like it's some kind of like little flirty remark. And it felt weird to like have her kind of saying no, and then at the last minute be like, oh, actually I am interested, when she seems like this really strong female character who's not really, like, she at no point before that point would you think that she would ever say yes to him. And it kind of seems like it would be an adrenaline thing where she's like caught up in the moment and she says yes, and then maybe later she's like, I don't know, like. But because their relationship was never really clarified, it was kind of like she could have it there and it was okay. But then again, you kind of feel like this is the last kind of like tableau, like dramatic scene, and then it just ends and you don't see where anything goes. And it's kind of like, I don't know, like that part for me was a little bit of a letdown, because I was like, why does it have to be like that trope where like the guy saves you and you're like indebted to him and you have to like have a thing with him now? I don't know, maybe that was just like a me thing, but I found it annoying. So yeah, on the whole, I feel like especially the last section of the book is like really well paced, like everything happens super fast, and it's really exciting to read for that reason. But because of the linguistic quirks and the issues with their relationship and all the stuff I've just talked about, basically, I didn't give it a super high score. And I feel like if you're gonna read it, like just know that like you're reading for plot, you're not reading for writing, and there's some weird relationship stuff. But all in all, I feel like it's not terrible, but it's not great, so do with that what you will, I guess. So the next book that I read was Slade House by David Mitchell, and this is actually the first Mitchell that I finished. I started reading The Bone Clocks a few years back, like I got it as a Christmas present, and I think it was just like a wrong place, wrong time situation for me. Like, I thought it was interesting, but I just like was not in a place where I wanted to be reading like a super thick book where it's really hard to get into, and you have kind of like, similarly to, I think, Bridge of Clay, but like on another level in terms of like obscurity and kind of like having to like play the long game and wait it out until you can understand what's going on. And I feel like at that point that was just like not what I was looking to read. So I DNF'd it at that time, and then I actually ended up getting rid of the book, which I later regretted. But yeah, so long story short, I started that Mitchell but didn't finish it. And I actually have checked out of the library currently Cloud Atlas and the Bone Clocks, and I'm not sure if I'll get to them before I have to take them back. So we'll see. David Mitchell might be like one of those people who I like keep trying, like eventually get there, but Slade House is slightly different from those texts. There is an element of time travel. It's kind of, I would categorize this as like a horror / thriller read. It's pretty short. It's under 300 pages, and I like really loved this. I thought it was super, super well done. The one thing I will say is that it's very kind of like episodic and repetitive. Like once you know what's happening, you can kind of predict like the rest of the book to a certain point. Like I would say probably until the very end, when it's kind of like things are changed around somewhat. I'm talking in vagaries because I don't want to give anything away. But I think it is also one of those kind of like wheels within wheels, Truman Show, like when you finish it, you're a little bit like, is this reality? Am I asleep or am I awake? Like it's kind of, it can fuck with your mind in that way. Excuse my language. So if that's not your deal, or if that's not something you're interested in right now, I would like put this on the back shelf for a little while maybe and like not read it at the moment. But overall, I thought it was really well done. And yeah, I don't have a lot else to say about it, but I would definitely recommend it if you're like a horror thriller person, and like there is a little bit of like gore and body horror, but I think overall it's not like super violent in that way. It's more kind of psychological. So yeah, that's Slade House. Okay, so the next book I read was a reread for me. It's Where'd You Go, Bernadette by Maria Semple. And I first read it like a while ago too, maybe pre-high school even, or maybe while I was in high school, but either way, that's a while ago now for me. So I think this is definitely a comfort read for me. I really enjoyed it. It's funny and it's kind of lighthearted, but still like a little bit dramatic. Maria Semple, actually her background, I believe her father was an author, or like a writer of some kind, and she was actually writing for TV and movies, so she was kind of like more in that world before she started writing fiction, and I think that definitely shows through in her writing. One of the things that I love about her books is that they're kind of written, or this one specifically is written in kind of a combination of narrative, different points of view. You get like letters and emails, and it's kind of a compendium of different kinds of things. So I feel like that keeps the reading experience really fresh. Like even if you've read it before and you're coming back to it, I think overall like that really helps with the pacing. And I think her background as like a TV writer really helps her in terms of the way the book as a whole is paced and kind of like the movement of the different sections and how they work together. I would definitely recommend this. I feel like, yeah, it's funny and it's lighthearted, and it's kind of, if you want something that's like not a huge commitment like emotionally, or like something that's just going to be enjoyable to read, and that like there are some dark moments but it has a really happy ending, I would definitely recommend this. And yeah, I enjoyed it, and I guess that's all I have to say about it. The next book I read was An American Marriage by Tayari Jones, and this is the first thing I've read by Jones, but I am now interested in reading Silver Sparrow, which is another one of her books, really well reviewed, like New York Times bestselling author. First of all, I wish I had the book like to show you right now, because I really like the cover design, and I feel like it's so beautiful. It has like a golden tree on the front, and that becomes important in the context of the novel, kind of as a metaphor for certain things, but I'm not going to talk about it too much because I don't want to give anything away. This one is about kind of like the dissolution of a relationship between two people, a husband and wife, Celestial and what's his name? Roy, it's Roy. Okay. That took me a second, but came back to me. So it's about Celestial and Roy, who are kind of a young black couple in the US. And if you don't want to have like the first 30 pages spoiled, you can skip ahead, but I'm gonna put it out there. So initially they're kind of this young couple and they like have some relationship issues, but it's not anything that's like untenable. I believe they've been married for about a year, so they're still kind of in that honeymoon phase. And then Roy gets wrongly convicted of raping a white woman. And so the first section of the novel is kind of, it's told through letters, him writing from prison and her responding, and you get a lot of a sense of kind of what this time apart is doing to their relationship as a whole and how they're both dealing with it as characters. I think one of the things that I loved about this novel was like the characters felt so real. Like they felt like, it felt like I was talking to them when I was reading the book. And I thought that was so valuable, and I feel like it's so hard to, like, fiction is kind of like a mystery to me. Like, I'll write about things that have happened in my own life, and like I'll write poetry, but I find it really hard to try and get into like the voice of someone else, and like the voice of another character. So I feel like something that I found really incredible was the way that Tayari Jones writes characters and the way that it just feels like they're leaping off the page. And yeah, I thought it was great. The one thing is, for me, the ending was like a little bit, it came like a little bit too soon. Like I kind of wanted to like stretch the book out a little bit more and have like maybe like another 30 to 50 pages to wrap things up. And it felt like, I don't know, the plot is complex and it's hard to deal with all of the nuances that come with what they've gone through and how it's affected their relationship. But I think, I don't know how I would have ended it differently or better. I think I just wanted more time to deal with kind of the repercussions of the plot as a whole. And like I wanted my hand held for like a little bit longer before it ended as a reader. But overall, great book, highly recommend it. I think it talks about like super interesting issues, but I think it's also like it has a great balance of being like urgently important in kind of like a contextual like an American way. What am I trying to say? But I think in addition, like you really care about the characters, and it's this very kind of like intimate portrait of this relationship and what's happening to it as a result of all these events in the characters' lives. So yeah, highly recommend. Yeah, I loved it. Okay, so I only have 2 books left to talk about. Thank you for staying if you've watched this far into the video. I realized this is going to be long, so apologies in advance for that. The next book I read was Today Will Be Different by Maria Semple. After reading Where'd You Go, Bernadette, I was really interested to read more of her writing. I feel like a few years ago when I originally read it, like I was also interested to read more, but it was one of those things where like I was reading other things and I just kind of, like it fell by the wayside. So this was a good time for me to be like, hey, what else has she written and can I get it from my library? Her first novel, which came before Bernadette, was called This One Is Mine, and I haven't read that yet. I tried to get it from the library, but my library doesn't have it. So instead I got Today Will Be Different, which is the novel that came a few years after Bernadette. And this one, it has a very similar vibe to Bernadette, I think. I'm saying Bernadette so many times while I'm talking about this. But yeah, I found it, again, it was like funny, fast-paced. I think it has like a slightly different tone, and it also incorporates kind of like a graphic novel within the narrative. So that's actually in the book, and there's like use of images, which I found really interesting and entertaining, and I loved that, the use of that in the text, because the main character, our protagonist, is an animator, so that's kind of like a way that like this graphic novel she wrote ends up being important in the context of the book. I think it's maybe for a slightly, I don't know that it's for a slightly different audience, but it focuses on like an older protagonist. I believe she's a mother, and I think she's in her 40s, I want to say, 40s or 50s. It is similar in the sense that a character disappears and it's about someone tracking them down and the kind of like circuitous path that they take to do that. The weird thing for me about this was that the cover design makes it look like the book is going to be so much darker than it is. And I don't know if that's like a marketing thing or like, I don't know what they were going for there in terms of like the publisher, but I felt like I was lied to on the cover because I was like, it has kind of like a woman who's like covering her face, and it's kind of like repetitive text that goes across her body. And I felt like that made it look like it was going to be this like devastating like read, and then it really wasn't. I think it's ultimately like, well, it's, as I said, slightly darker than her second novel. I think it's really like positive on the whole, and again, like funny, and it has like all the best parts of her writing. Like her humor really shines, and just like, I think the way she writes about people is really compelling. So, weird cover. Not sure what that was about. But overall, I really recommend it. The next book that I read was Trick Mirror: Reflections on Self-Delusion by Jia Tolentino. This was probably the best book I read last month. And I would even like extend that to like the past, like I think this is going to be one of my best books of the year. I cannot say enough good things about this book. It's a book of essays, and I gave it 5 stars. I don't often give 5-star reviews, but this was just like, I feel like this is gonna be like one of my like holy grail things, and probably when I allow myself to buy books again, I think I'm gonna pick up a copy of this because there are already things that like I want to go back to and reread. The essays span a lot of different topics, I think. There's one that talks about kind of like marriage and the history of it, as well as like Tolentino's own decision not to get married. And it kind of has these like autobiographical ties, as well as this kind of more informational, historical, research-based approach. And I think overall her writing is just super compelling. She's funny and she's witty, and she has this way of kind of dissecting and talking about like our current historical moment and the influence of technology and social media and all of these things that I feel like I've been thinking about in my own head for so long. And somebody finally said something that I was like, that, you were thinking that? Like, I was thinking that. So I feel like in the way that it kind of spoke to me as a reader specifically, I feel like that definitely, I'm not unbiased, I guess. Like, the reflections that she's talking about are also things that I've been thinking and writing about recently, so I feel like for that reason, like, I was bound to like it. But her writing is just like so good. Like, there are so many lines that like I took pictures of or like copied down in my journal to think about later, to kind of like chew on. And as I started to say before I interrupted myself, the essays specifically kind of span a few different things. There's the one about marriage, which I discussed. There's another one which is called Pure Heroine, which talks about kind of the difference between, in children's literature, the like young female heroine who's kind of like carefree and brave and gets to go off and have all these fabulous adventures, and then, you know, the polar opposite of that, like the Anna Karenina, the Jane Eyre, who's kind of like super unhappy. And I found that super interesting. There's another one that talks about her stint on reality TV when she was like a young teenager, but there's this kind of thread that runs through all of them that's thinking about this idea of self-delusion, and I guess like how like each essay is kind of like a little bit like its own mirror. Like, it kind of brings out a different fractal or like a different aspect of this kind of fear or anxiety about how she's looking at herself, how others are perceiving her, and how all of that is kind of refracted through technology and social media and all of the like anxieties of kind of modern day life. So yeah, I have no notes. I think this is an incredible book. I've also read some of her essays in the New Yorker and things like that. If I can find it, I'll leave in the description one of her essays that I read towards the beginning of the pandemic that I thought was just like incredible. And I hope she writes another book because I will be buying it and poring over it incessantly, because I think she's just so good. And yeah, definitely a new favorite for sure. So that is it. That is everything that I read in the month of March. If you made it this far, thank you. I realize this was probably a super long video. I'm gonna try to edit it down as much as I can, but I think I've been filming for like 40 minutes, so it's gonna be a long one. I think it was a really good reading month overall. I think I had like a really good balance of kind of nonfiction and fiction and things that were like a little lighter and things that were a little darker, and yeah, I really loved a lot of what I read. Found some new favorites for sure. So yeah, if you enjoyed this video, do me a favor and hit the like button. Subscribe if you'd like to see more content from me. I'd love to see a comment from you down below if you read anything really great last month, or you have any recommendations for me. I'd love to hear about those. Or if you have thoughts on anything that I read last month, if you read it too and you like want to debate me, or if you agree, just tell me all the things. Tell me all the things about all the books that you've read. That's all I want. Yeah, I think that's it. I think that's all from me. I've been filming for so long. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye! Whew. Allergy season. My stomach just made the loudest noise.